The bobcat didn't run. It stood motionless just beyond the porch light's reach, a silhouette framed in the soft swirl of falling snow. Its amber eyes shimmered with something older than fear, fixed on the old man kneeling in the frozen soil. Everett Cade's hands, thick and cracked from 72 winters, moved slowly as he patted down the earth over the grave. No prayer, no ceremony, just the weight of loss settling into the frost. Beneath the birch tree, wrapped in the old quilt Mara had sewn when they were young, lay Buster. 13 years of loyalty, laughter, and long silences had ended in a final breath just before sunset. Everett had carried him out with care, whispering thanks through clenched teeth as the dog's body grew still in his arms. The bobcat hadn't come for food. Everett knew that. It hadn't come to harm. It had come to witness, to mark something passing. A moment too strange for logic, too familiar for coincidence.
Hey there, little
He watched
fella.
it, unmoving,
Welcome home.
heart thudding like it hadn't in years. And then, just as snow began to collect on Everett's shoulders, the cat blinked, slow and deliberate, and turned toward the tree line. That's when the second one appeared. Smaller, with a pale patch on her chest, barely visible beneath her winter coat. She brushed against the larger cat, then turned her gaze to Everett. And in those silent seconds, something passed between them, a memory perhaps, or a promise remembered. They vanished without sound. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low. The collar still hung by the door where Buster always slept. The photo of Mara with her rescued fox kits sat crooked on the mantel, a faint layer of dust softening the glass. Everett lowered himself into his chair and stared into the flames, letting them flicker across his lined face. "You wouldn't believe it, Mar," he murmured. "They came back, both of them, just like you said they might." A silence hung in the room, but it wasn't empty. It pulsed with memory, with the ache of what had been. And as Everett closed his eyes, the snow kept falling, the forest breathing softly around him. He hadn't seen those bobcats in over 2 years, but somehow tonight, they knew. Before the bobcats, before the silence, before the grief got thick enough to taste, there was just the mountain, the cabin, and Everett Cade. He'd built the place with his own hands 50 years ago, back when his shoulders didn't creak and his back wasn't a weather vane for every coming storm. Tucked in a bend of the Clearwater Valley, 3 hours from the nearest town that had more stop signs than people, the cabin was his fortress, his memory box, his penance. Most mornings, Everett sat on the porch with a chipped mug of black coffee and watched the ridgeline for movement. Moose in the early spring, elk in the fall. He liked the rhythm of things. Predictable, familiar. Buster always by his side, paws crossed, tail thumping once every now and then, as if to remind Everett he was still there. Buster wasn't much for barking. More the watchful kind. Smart eyes. The kind that studied you before deciding what you were worth. He'd been Everett's shadow since Mara passed. Never wandered too far, never left the man's side, even when arthritis started stealing his joints one by one. It was early May when everything started to turn. The snow had melted except in the shadows, and the river ran high and fast with runoff. Everett had just stepped out with his coffee when Buster froze at the edge of the porch, his nose lifted, tail rigid. "What is it, boy?" Everett asked, though he already felt the shift in the air. Buster didn't answer with a bark. Just a low, throaty whine and a look over his shoulder that said more than words ever could. "Follow me." Everett set the mug down on the rail, grabbed his old walking stick, a gift from Mara, carved with a winding trail of mountain laurel, and stepped off the porch. Buster moved slower these days, but he moved with purpose. Down the slope, through the spruce and aspen, Everett followed. The forest was alive with that early spring hush where everything holds its breath before blooming. They walked for maybe 20 minutes. Then Buster stopped near a fallen log tangled in ferns and last year's dead leaves. He circled, nose low, tail trembling. Then came the sound, a tiny, rasping cry, barely audible over the wind. Everett parted the brush and looked down, 2 kittens, barely old enough to have their eyes open. Spotted coats, short tails, bobcats. They were curled beside something Everett couldn't look at right away. When he finally forced himself, his breath caught. The mother lay twisted in death, one hind leg caught in the rusted jaws of a trap. A trap Everett recognized. His trap. He dropped to his knees. Time slowed. The wind stopped. The forest waited. One kitten, the bigger one, tried to hiss, but it came out more like a cough. The smaller trembled violently, its tiny sides pumping with every breath. Everett's heart, the one he'd thought had gone cold years ago, cracked. Just a little, just enough to let something in. "No," he whispered, voice trembling. "Not like this." And in that moment, he wasn't Everett the trapper. He wasn't the man who once prided himself on his clean sets and tidy kills. He was just a man kneeling in the forest, staring down at what he'd done, and what he still had a chance to undo. The wind shifted as Everett scooped the kittens into his flannel, tucking them close to his chest like he was afraid they might vanish if he moved too fast. Their bodies were alarmingly light, bones wrapped in baby fur, and not much more. He could feel their trembling through his shirt. One of them let out a soft mewl, a sound so raw it seemed to snag something deep in his ribs. Buster stood nearby, watching, ears alert but posture soft. The old dog inched forward, sniffed the larger kitten gently, then sat beside Everett with a low grunt, as if to say, "Well, we can't leave them. We can't." Everett's knees protested as he stood. The walk back felt longer. He kept glancing down, adjusting the kittens in his shirt, one hand always resting over them like a shield. At the cabin, he stoked the fire until it roared and set up a cardboard box near the hearth, lining it with the old wool blanket Mara used to keep in the truck for emergencies. He placed the kittens inside, their tiny bodies curling into the heat. Weak but alive, his hands shook. "Lord help me," he muttered, rubbing his face. "I don't know what the hell I'm doing." But he remembered some things. Mara had taken in wildlings before. Injured squirrels, a blind fox kid, even a hawk with a shattered wing. She'd kept a little wooden crate under the sink labeled "Critter Emergencies." Everett hadn't touched it in years. He found it. The powdered kitten formula was expired, but it would do. There were syringes, heat packs, notes scribbled in Mara's handwriting, tiny tips and reminders. He boiled water, cooled it to body temp, mixed the formula by memory. His fingers moved awkwardly, like a man trying to remember an old song. The female kitten was barely responsive. The male had more spark. He latched clumsily onto the bottle, suckling with weak but growing determination. Everett exhaled, long and shaky, like he'd been holding his breath since the woods. He named the stronger one Jasper. The other, quiet and pale, he called Fern. Buster lay beside the box, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. When Fern whimpered in her sleep, Buster gently nudged the box with his nose. Everett watched, his throat tightening. He stayed up all night. Every 2 hours he fed them, stimulated them with a warm cloth the way Mara had shown him, checked their temperature, whispered to them soft nonsense words from a man who hadn't spoken to anyone in days. At dawn, both kittens were still breathing. Outside, the trees swayed with new life. The mountains glowed pink at the tips. And inside that cabin, something long buried in Everett Cade stirred. A flicker of purpose, raw and fragile, like the heartbeat of a thing not quite ready to die. He poured a fresh cup of coffee, added a splash of whiskey, and sat beside the box. "We're not out of the woods yet, little ones," he said quietly, "but you're not alone. Not anymore." The days that followed moved in quiet loops. Everett marked time by feedings, every 3 hours around the clock. Jasper was thriving. He took to the bottle like a seasoned drinker, letting out tiny growls when it didn't come fast enough. Fern was the worry. She remained lethargic, often refusing the bottle until Everett warmed the formula in his palm, mimicking body heat. He remembered watching Mara do the same thing with a half-frozen squirrel once. She'd cooed to it, her voice like wind through tall grass. He tried the same tone with Fern, whispering old country lullabies he hadn't sung since his boy was young. Every hour Fern lived felt like a small miracle. On the fourth day, Everett found her grooming Jasper with slow, clumsy licks. He nearly wept. By the end of the first week, the box beside the hearth had become their world. Buster rarely left his post nearby. When Everett shifted the kittens into a larger crate, Buster simply moved with them. He seemed to know his job: guardian, watcher, bridge between wild and home. Everett kept the radio off. The TV hadn't worked in years. The only sound in the cabin was the crackling of the fire, the soft rustle of paws, the whisper of life returning. He couldn't forget the trap. At night, it haunted him: the dull snap, the imagined scream, the waiting. He saw the mother bobcat in his dreams, her eyes glassy, mouth slightly parted as if frozen mid-call. He'd always believed in clean kills, humane lines, but age had slowed him. He'd missed one, maybe more. One morning after the 5 a.m. feeding, Everett stood staring at the old steel traps hung in the shed. Some were rusted shut. Others gleamed with the same sharp hunger they'd always had. He took down 3, loaded them into the back of the truck, drove up along the ridge to where he used to set lines in winter. It was the place Mara had called his second church. The trees were just leafing out. Snow patches still clung to the northern slope. He found the first trap buried under moss and roots, exactly where he'd left it 3 winters ago. The chain was wrapped around a bent pine sapling. It hadn't been triggered. He took out a crowbar and bolt cutters. It took nearly an hour, but when he was done, there was nothing left of it that could harm a living thing. Driving back, the forest seemed quieter. Not in a dead way, in a forgiving way. That night, Fern climbed onto his chest while he dozed by the fire. She weighed less than a pound, but he felt every ounce of her as she curled beneath his chin and let out the faintest, trembling purr. He didn't move, didn't breathe. "You're gonna be trouble," he whispered into her fur. And for the first time in years, Everett Cade smiled without bitterness. The summer came in slowly, warming the valley one bloom at a time. The river lowered, the trails dried, and with each passing week, the bobcat kittens changed. Jasper grew bold. He would climb the back of the couch and leap onto Everett's shoulders when he walked past, purring like a little machine with something to prove. He'd bat at Everett's beard and curl up inside Buster's crate, tail flicking smugly as if he owned the place. Fern was different. She moved like smoke, quiet, watchful, almost delicate. She studied Jasper's wild energy, then chose the smarter path. She didn't leap. She calculated. She didn't cuddle, but she didn't run either. She trusted Everett, cautiously. And Everett, in turn, began to change. Each morning, after the sunrise feeding and after checking their weights, he kept a little notebook, tracking ounces like gold. Everett would load a set of tools into the truck: bolt cutters, gloves, a crowbar. Then he and Buster would drive into the hills. One by one, he pulled them up. Some had rusted into the earth, teeth blunted, chains tangled with root and time. Others snapped viciously when disturbed, eager and hungry despite their age. He dismantled every one. He didn't speak much on those trips, but when he did, it was to the trees. "I took too much," he'd whisper, voice nearly lost to the wind. "And I didn't leave enough behind." Buster would grunt in agreement, occasionally nosing a buried chain with disdain. Back at the cabin, the kittens transitioned to solid food. Everett started them on minced chicken, then slowly introduced bits of rabbit, venison. He built a wire enclosure out back, 20 by 30 feet, with logs, climbing platforms, even a half-buried stump Mara had once used for potting herbs. Jasper loved it immediately. He'd sprint the length of the pen, pounce on leaves, stalk butterflies with unrelenting focus. His coat was turning deep gold, dappled with black rosettes and a growing swagger. Fern took her time. She explored with intent, studied every shadow before stepping into it. She discovered the latch on the pen within a week. Everett had to double lock it. One night he found her staring through the mesh at the stars, completely still. The kind of still that wild things understand, the kind that humans forget. "I know," he said quietly from the porch. "You're not mine. You were never meant to be." Fern didn't move, but she blinked, slow and soft, and for Everett, that was enough. The days slipped into each other, stitched together by routine and small miracles. Jasper and Fern were nearly 4 months old now. Their legs had stretched, muscles sharpening beneath their coats. Jasper's confidence had swelled into mischief. He'd stalk Everett's boots in the morning, ambush Buster from behind a pile of firewood, and once even stole a strip of bacon right off the pan. Fern remained the mystery. She rarely played with Jasper unless no one was watching. Her movements were quiet but precise, like she was rehearsing for something only she understood. She still didn't like to be touched. She'd tolerate Everett when he brought food, would meet his eyes for long, silent seconds, but she always kept a sliver of distance, a boundary. Everett respected that. She reminded him of his son. Quiet, brilliant, slipped through his fingers when he wasn't looking. He hadn't spoken to the boy in over a year. Didn't know where he lived now. Seattle, last he heard. Everett had written letters, but never sent them. Too much space, too many wrong words. One morning, as the mist burned off the treetops, Everett stepped outside with a bowl of food and found the pen empty. No Jasper, no Fern. Panic hit like a hammer. His chest seized. He called out, not yelling, but firm. Buster was already sniffing the air, tail stiff, head low. The latch was undone. Everett felt the blood drain from his face. He grabbed his coat, a flashlight, his walking stick, left the bowl on the porch. He and Buster pushed into the woods, the morning still wet with dew and silence. For an hour they walked, then 2, then 3. He called their names like it mattered, though he knew it probably didn't. Near an old creek bed, Buster stopped, ears forward, eyes sharp, and there, on a flat patch of moss, paw prints. 2 sets. Everett crouched, knees cracking. The tracks were fresh. He followed them through ferns, around a boulder, and into a thicket. And there she was, Fern, perched on a downed log, head high, watching him, unafraid. Behind her, Jasper wrestled with something in the underbrush. Everett caught a glimpse of fur and movement. A rabbit. Fern blinked. Everett dropped to one knee. "I wasn't ready," he whispered, "but maybe you are." Fern stepped forward. Slowly. She came within a few feet, looked down at Buster, then back up at Everett. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm of wild breath. Then, without a sound, she turned and disappeared into the trees. Jasper followed. Everett sat there for a long time, listening to the wind. They came back the next evening. As the sun dipped below the ridge, both kittens strolled out of the woods and sat at the edge of the enclosure. Not inside, not captive, just present. Everett didn't move. He placed the food down gently and backed away. They ate. Fern first, Jasper following. Then they slipped into the night again. It became a pattern. Each dusk, they'd return. Each dawn, they'd vanish. Wild, but not gone. And Everett realized something. The world doesn't always give you second chances. But sometimes, if you listen close, it gives you grace. Quiet, fierce, and fleeting as a paw print in snow. The air had changed, the kind of change you feel in your bones before you see it in the leaves. September had crept in with its golden light and cooler mornings. The aspens whispered different things now, and the sun sank faster each evening. Buster was slowing. He still followed Everett to the enclosure each morning, but his gait had turned uneven. Some days, his back legs would buckle a little on the slope. Other days, he'd just lie on the porch, ears perked, watching. Everett pretended not to notice. But the signs were there. The stiffness, the wheeze, the way Buster sometimes stared into the woods like he knew a goodbye was coming. The bobcats were growing restless. They were nearly 5 months now, almost full-grown. Jasper's shoulders had broadened, his coat a rich tapestry of gold and shadows. Fern had grown lean and sharp-eyed, her chest patch like a silver flame against the dusk. They barely touched the food Everett left out anymore. Instead, he watched them hunt. Rabbits, mice, once a grouse. He'd see them emerge at twilight with blood on their paws, their movements quick and clean, wild, beautiful, ready. Not because they were leaving, because he finally understood what leaving meant. It meant the pen would sit empty. It meant the nights would grow long again. It meant Buster wouldn't be around forever. He started taking longer walks with the dog. No destination, just movement, just time. One evening they stood together at the edge of the field behind the cabin. The mountains burned orange. Jasper and Fern were playing in the tall grass, chasing, leaping, vanishing, reappearing, like ghosts learning to live. Buster sat down slowly, watched. His tail moved once, then stopped. Everett knelt beside him, scratched the soft patch behind his ears. "It's time, isn't it, boy?" Buster didn't look at him, just kept his eyes on the cats. The next morning, Everett opened the enclosure gate, wide, no hesitation. He left it open all day. That night, Fern didn't return. Jasper came alone, circling the house twice before curling up beneath the birch tree and sleeping until dawn. The next day, neither came. Everett stood on the porch, coffee cooling in his hands, staring at the woods. He didn't call them. He didn't cry. He just stood there, letting the wind pass through him. And behind him, inside the cabin, Buster didn't move from his bed. His breathing had grown labored. Everett sat beside him in the quiet, stroked his muzzle, whispered, "They made it, old man. You helped them make it." Buster's tail wagged once, and Everett stayed there until the stars came out, holding on to the silence like it might give him something back. The morning was silent. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind. The kind that presses into your ribs and makes the air feel too thick to breathe. Buster hadn't eaten in 2 days. He barely lifted his head when Everett brought water. His chest rose slow, fell slower. Everett carried him outside, wrapped him in the old army blanket and laid him beneath the birch tree. The same place the bobcats had always lingered. The same place Mara used to plant wildflowers. He sat beside him, legs stretched out, back resting against the bark. The sunrise spilled across the valley in streaks of gold and copper, but Everett only had eyes for the dog. "You can rest now, buddy," he whispered. "You've done enough." Buster didn't move, but his ears twitched at the sound of Everett's voice, like he was trying to follow it one last time. Everett reached down, resting a hand gently on his side. The breathing was shallow now, fragile, like a thread unraveling. He thought he heard something. A branch snapping, soft steps in the underbrush, and then they appeared. First Fern, silent as ever, moving like shadow. Then Jasper, larger now, but unmistakable with that confident gait and the faint notch in his right ear. They walked straight to the birch tree. No hesitation, no fear. Fern pressed her head gently against Buster's chest. Jasper lay down beside him, curling his body so their flanks touched. The way they had as kittens, the way they had when the world was smaller, safer. Buster opened his eyes, just for a moment. A flicker of recognition. Then he exhaled, long, final. And the air shifted. The bobcats didn't move, didn't cry. They stayed with him, pressed close, their bodies still and warm beside the one who had once been their guardian. Everett couldn't speak, couldn't think. He just wept. Not loud, not messy. Just a quiet, endless grief that soaked into the earth beneath him. When the sun climbed higher and the breeze turned cool, The bobcat stood. Fern rubbed her head against Everett's knee. Jasper placed a single paw on Everett's boot, then turned. They vanished into the trees. The silence returned, but this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt sacred, like something had been witnessed, like something had been finished. Everett sat beside the still body of his dog until the sky turned purple and the wind carried the scent of pine and memory. And then he began to dig. Everett buried Buster beneath the birch tree, in the same blanket he'd wrapped him in that morning. No marker, just a flat stone he placed gently over the mound of earth. He sat beside it for hours, watching the clouds roll over the mountains, listening to the hush that always followed loss. When the cold crept in, he went inside. The cabin felt wrong, too still, too wide. He left the door open, just in case. That night, he couldn't sleep. He wandered the cabin like a ghost, touching things, not really seeing them. He stood in front of the fireplace, staring at the wall. 23 pelts, bobcat, fox, coyote, each one tanned and stretched. A trophy from another time, from another version of himself. He'd once believed those hides were proof of who he was. A craftsman, a survivor, a man of the land. Now they looked like a lie. He packed them up one by one, folding them carefully into boxes. The motion was slow, like a ritual, a kind of unburdening. At sunrise, he loaded the boxes into the truck and drove down the valley road, gravel pinging against the undercarriage like hail. He didn't speak to anyone at the tribal center, just handed the boxes to an elder he'd met once before, nodding when asked if they were for ceremonial use. "It's time they served something better," Everett said softly. He drove home with the windows down, letting the wind take whatever was left. Back at the cabin, he took down the nails that had once held fur, cleaned the walls, lit a fire. Then he opened the old photo box Mara had kept beneath the bed. He hung different things now. A photo of Mara holding a baby fox to her chest, both of them smiling. Buster as a puppy, ears too big for his head, sitting proudly in front of the cabin. And in the center, a snapshot Everett had taken just weeks ago. Jasper and Fern curled together on a log, eyes half closed, bathed in sunlight. He stepped back. The wall no longer looked like a ledger. It looked like a life. That fall, the bobcats returned once or twice. They didn't come close, just lingered near the edge of the clearing, silent and watchful. Everett would nod at them from the porch. Sometimes he'd speak aloud, just in case they understood. "I'm still here," he'd say, "still trying to be better." By winter, their visits stopped, and Everett knew it was right. They weren't his to keep. They never had been. But for a while, they'd chosen to stay, and that, he knew, was love, in its purest, wildest form. 2 more winters passed in the valley. Everett moved slower now. His hands ached in the cold, and the walk down to the creek took twice as long. But his days had rhythm, purpose. He volunteered with the local wildlife rescue, mostly over the phone, identifying tracks, advising on orphan care, explaining how to handle a spooked moose without getting flattened. He never trapped again. Instead, he kept a journal. Notebooks filled with sketches of animals, entries about the weather, and memories he didn't want to lose. Some were about Buster, some about Mara, most about the bobcats, Jasper and Fern. Sometimes, after a snowfall, Everett would find tracks outside the cabin. Always 2 sets, side by side. He'd stand at the window with his coffee and smile, imagining them watching, just out of sight. He lived like that until the spring of his 78th year. The mailman found him in his chair by the fire. Peaceful, book open on his lap, one hand still holding a pencil. His son came up a week later. There wasn't much to sort. Everett hadn't left a mess behind, just a letter, handwritten, short.